Every day, you rely on an invisible network of machines orbiting 20,000 kilometers above your head. They get you where you're going. They process your payments. They connect you to the entire world. But what if that network was the very first casualty in the next global conflict? Right now, the United States, Russia, and China are in a new arms race to control space, and they're developing terrifying weapons designed to hunt and kill satellites. This isn't a movie plot. It's the new reality of 21st century warfare, where the first shots might be fired in total silence, hundreds of miles above the Earth. It's hard to overstate just how deeply our world is woven into the fabric of space. Satellites are the quiet, unsung heroes of modern life. Think about your day. Did you use a map on your phone? That was GPS, a constellation of satellites providing pinpoint location data to the whole planet. Check the weather? That data came from satellites monitoring the atmosphere from above. Use a credit card or check the stock market? Every single global financial transaction relies on the hyper-precise timing signals from GPS satellites to sync up networks and securely validate trillions of dollars in activity. This orbital infrastructure is the central nervous system of our globalized world. It's what makes global communications, live news broadcasts, and even high-speed internet in the middle of nowhere possible. For the military, this dependence is even more intense. Satellites are the eyes, ears, and voice of a modern fighting force. They provide secure communications that link soldiers on the ground to command centers thousands of miles away. They deliver the intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, ISR, that lets a country see threats coming from over the horizon. And critically, they guide the precision weapons that have defined modern warfare. For decades, this vital high ground was a pretty peaceful place, a domain for science and business. That era is over. The very systems that give us so much convenience and security have become our single greatest vulnerability. The world's major powers have all realized that in a future conflict, whoever controls space will have a huge advantage on Earth. And so, the quiet void above our heads is secretly and systematically being turned into a new battlefield. The question isn't if a war could be fought in space anymore, but what it will look like when it finally kicks off. The idea of war in space is nothing new. It's a fear born right at the dawn of the space age. When the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1 in 1957, the world heard the satellite's tiny beeps, not just as a scientific achievement, but as a chilling warning. The same rocket that could put a satellite in orbit could also drop a nuclear warhead on any city on Earth. The space race and the Cold War were two sides of the same coin. Almost right away, both the US and the Soviet Union started working on anti-satellite weapons, or ASATs. These early programs were crude. Usually, they just involved launching a missile, sometimes with a nuclear tip, to blow up an enemy satellite. The logic was brutal. If we can't have space, nobody can. One of the wildest ideas was President Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, nicknamed Star Wars. It was a multi-billion-dollar dream of a shield made of space-based lasers and particle beams to shoot down Soviet missiles. Star Wars never fully happened, but it cemented the idea of space as a war zone in the public mind and poured money into technologies that are now a reality. After the Cold War, things calmed down for a bit. We saw cooperation, like with the International Space Station, but that peace was fragile. The real turning point came in 2007. In a move that shocked the world, China launched a missile and obliterated one of its own old weather satellites. The test was a loud and clear demonstration of its power. It was a signal that space was no longer a sanctuary, and that a new, more complicated arms race was on. The US shot back with its own test a year later, using a missile fired from a ship to destroy a broken spy satellite. Since then, the race has only gotten faster. In 2019, India became the fourth country to show it could do the same, taking out one of its own satellites. Then, in November 2021, Russia conducted its own ASAT missile test, destroying an old Soviet satellite and creating a massive, dangerous cloud of debris. These aren't just technical tests, they're political statements. They are nations planting a flag, not on the moon, but in the strategic territory of orbital warfare. They're making it clear they can cripple their enemies' eyes and ears in the sky. The old fears are back, but this time the field is more crowded, the tech is more advanced, and the stakes have never been higher. So, what would a real war in space look like? Forget what you've seen in the movies. It wouldn't be fleets of starfighters dogfighting with lasers. The reality is more subtle, more technical, and frankly, more terrifying. The weapons being developed today are designed for stealth and precision, and they fall into three main buckets. First, you've got kinetic kill vehicles. This is the most direct approach. It's basically a high-tech bullet hitting another high-tech bullet. These are ground-launched missiles like the ones tested by China, the US, India, and Russia that fly into orbit and physically slam into a satellite. Objects in orbit are moving at over 17,000 miles per hour, so a collision doesn't just damage a satellite, it pulverizes it, creating thousands of pieces of shrapnel. And that brings us to the biggest danger of this kind of warfare: space debris. Every collision creates a cloud of junk that keeps orbiting Earth at lethal speeds. This debris threatens every other satellite in its path, from civilian weather satellites to the International Space Station. A large-scale kinetic war could trigger a nightmare scenario called the Kesler Syndrome. This is a chain reaction where collisions create more debris, which causes more collisions, until whole sections of orbit become totally unusable for generations. It's a strategy that risks mutually assured destruction, not just for the countries fighting, but for everyone. Second are directed energy weapons. This is where it starts to sound like science fiction, but the tech is very real. Instead of hitting a satellite, these weapons use focused energy to blind or fry it. Think powerful ground-based lasers that can be aimed at a satellite's sensitive cameras, effectively blinding it. Or space-based weapons that use high-powered microwaves to cook a satellite's electronics, turning it into a useless hunk of metal. Russia and China are both investing heavily in this tech. The big advantage here is that it's sneaky. An enemy satellite might just stop working, and it would be incredibly hard to prove if it was a solar flare, a malfunction, or a deliberate attack. The third, and maybe the most common form of space warfare right now, is electronic and cyber warfare. This is the invisible front line. U.S. Space Force officials have said that American satellites are under attack every single day. These aren't explosions, they're invisible assaults. This includes jamming the signals from satellites, which can disrupt communications and GPS. It can also involve spoofing, where fake signals are sent to trick a GPS receiver, like on a guided missile or a cargo ship, into thinking it's somewhere else. And then there's the ultimate silent weapon: hacking. Satellites are just computers in orbit, and like any computer, they can be hacked. A successful cyber attack could let an enemy take control of a satellite, shut it down, feed its operators false information, or even use its own thrusters to send it crashing into another satellite. These are exactly the kinds of threats the U.S. Space Force practices defending against in massive war games, where hundreds of personnel train to counter live jamming, cyber intrusions, and orbital warfare threats. This mix of kinetic, energy, and electronic weapons creates a complex web of threats. The first shots of the next war won't be from a tank or a jet. They'll likely be a stream of malicious code or a silent beam of energy, crippling an enemy before they even know the fight has begun. This is a deep and fast-moving topic, and we're really just scratching the surface. If you're finding this breakdown useful and want to keep up with how technology is shaping our world and our security, take a second to subscribe to the channel. We go deep on these critical issues every week, and your support helps us keep doing it. This new space race isn't a simple two-player game. While dozens of countries operate satellites, the struggle for dominance is really being driven by three main players: the United States, China, and Russia. Each one has different goals, different strengths, and different strategies, creating a tense and unstable situation 20,000 kilometers above us. The United States has been the world's leader in space for a long time, and its military is completely dependent on its satellites. Recognizing the new threats, the U.S. created the Space Force in 2019, a military branch dedicated to defending American interests in space. The US strategy now is all about resilience. They assume their satellites will be attacked, so the goal is to be able to fight through it. You can see this in large-scale war games where US Guardians practice defending against simulated orbital, electronic, and cyber attacks. The Pentagon is also pouring money into next-gen satellites that are harder to jam and disable. The US also made a big diplomatic move by declaring a unilateral ban on destructive anti-satellite missile tests, hoping to set a global example against creating more space junk. China, on the other hand, is what the Pentagon calls its pacing threat. China watched how much the US relied on space during conflicts like the Gulf War, and has spent years building an impressive arsenal of counter-space weapons. Their 2007 ASAT test was a wake-up call, but what they've done since is even more worrying to military planners. China is developing everything from ground-based missiles to co-orbital satellites. These grappler satellites can supposedly get close to an enemy satellite and either pull it out of orbit or disable it with a robotic arm. China is also making huge leaps in directed energy and cyber warfare. Their goal is clear. In a conflict, they want to be able to deny the US the use of its space assets, essentially blinding the American military. At the same time, China is building its own massive satellite network for navigation and communication, creating a parallel system to reduce its reliance on anyone else and project its power. Russia, the original space pioneer, is still a powerful and unpredictable force. While its space program has struggled with funding, it has focused on clever, asymmetric weapons. Russia has sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities and continues to develop advanced ASAT missile systems. More recently, intelligence reports have raised alarms about a particularly nasty Russian program, a potential space-based nuclear weapon. It's likely not a bomb meant to detonate like we'd imagine, but one designed to create a massive electromagnetic pulse, EMP, that could indiscriminately wipe out huge numbers of satellites across a wide orbit. This pursuit of a weapon that causes widespread, indiscriminate damage shows their strategic thinking. Since Russia is less economically dependent on space than the US, they may feel they have less to lose if parts of orbit become unusable. Beyond these three, other nations are staking their claim. India's 2019 ASAT test showed it's now a serious space power. Countries like France are developing patroller nanosatellites to keep an eye on their more valuable satellites. The high ground of space is getting crowded and contested, creating a fragile environment where one wrong move could have consequences for the entire planet. So what would actually happen if this new generation of space weapons was ever used on a massive scale? What would a day without satellites really look like? It would start with a strange, eerie silence. The first attacks would be invisible, a cyber intrusion or a beam of energy disabling key military satellites. On the ground for a moment, nothing would seem different, but in command centers, screens would flicker and go dark. Secure comms links would be cut. Drones would lose their connection to their pilots and either crash or fly off on their own. Then, the chaos would start to spill into civilian life. The first and most immediate hit would be the loss of GPS. Global supply chains would grind to a halt. Container ships crossing the ocean would be lost at sea. The entire logistics network of trucks, trains, and planes that our just-in-time economy runs on would be thrown into disarray. In cities, traffic lights would desync, causing gridlock on a scale you can't even imagine. Your phone's map? A useless blank screen. At the same time, the global financial system would be on the verge of collapse. Without the precise timing signals from GPS, stock market trades couldn't be verified. Credit card networks would crash. ATMs would stop working. International bank transfers? Impossible. The flow of global capital, the lifeblood of the modern economy, would just stop. Global communication would be next to go. International phone calls would fail. News channels would lose the ability to broadcast live from around the world. For billions of people, the internet would slow to a crawl or just stop working altogether, since so much of its backbone relies on satellite links and the timing they provide for fiber optic cables. For the military, it would be a catastrophe. The battlefield would be thrown back into the fog of war of an earlier century. An army would be made deaf, dumb, and blind. Without satellite intelligence, commanders wouldn't know what the enemy was doing over the next hill. Without satellite comms, they couldn't give orders. And most critically, without GPS, their entire arsenal of precision-guided weapons, the smart bombs and cruise missiles, would just become expensive dumb bombs. Decades of technological superiority would evaporate in hours. A U.S. Space Force official put it bluntly, "If the space domain feels pain, the rest of the Joint Force will likely feel that pain as well." This is the terrifying endgame of space warfare. Not a spectacular battle among the stars, but chaos and collapse right here on Earth. So, with this catastrophe looming, what's anyone doing to stop it? The response is happening on two fronts, technical and diplomatic, and both are a race against time. On the technical side, the keyword is resilience. Military planners now work on the assumption that they will lose some satellites in a war, so the goal is to build a network that can take hits and keep going. One way is to just harden satellites with extra shielding to protect them from radiation or lasers. Another is to make them more agile with their own thrusters so they can dodge an incoming missile. But the biggest change is the shift toward huge constellations of smaller, cheaper satellites, especially in low Earth orbit, LEO. This is where companies like SpaceX and its Starlink network are changing military strategy. Instead of relying on a few huge, expensive satellites, a country can launch thousands of smaller ones. The logic is simple. An enemy might be able to shoot down 1, 10, or even 100 satellites, but can they shoot down thousands before they run out of missiles? This strategy of resilience through proliferation makes the whole network much harder to take down. The war in Ukraine has been a powerful proof of concept, where the Starlink constellation has provided vital communication for Ukrainian forces, withstanding repeated Russian electronic attacks. On the diplomatic front, things are a lot harder. The main treaty for space is the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. It was brilliant for its time, banning nukes in orbit and declaring space the province of all humankind. But it has a huge loophole. It doesn't ban conventional weapons in space, and it says nothing about weapons on the ground that can attack things in space. This is the legal gray area that has allowed the current arms race to take off. Attempts to create new treaties have failed again and again. In 2024, a UN Security Council resolution pushed by the US and Japan to reaffirm the ban on nuclear weapons in space was vetoed by Russia. A counterproposal from Russia and China to ban all weapons in space was then vetoed by the US and its allies, who saw it as a trick to limit their defenses while ignoring existing threats from the ground. This gridlock shows just how deep the mistrust is. And the dual-use nature of space tech makes it even harder. A satellite with a robotic arm for repairing a friendly satellite could just as easily be used to disable an enemy one. The US has tried to lead by example by banning its own destructive ASAT missile tests, hoping to build a new international norm. But without a binding treaty that can actually be verified and enforced, the stability of space depends on a fragile balance of deterrence, where the only thing stopping the first shot is everyone's fear of what comes next. We are at a turning point. The invisible infrastructure that powers our modern world is now a battlefield in waiting. Nations are actively building weapons to control the ultimate high ground, from ground-based lasers to killer satellites, and even potential nuclear weapons designed to black out entire orbits. We're in a silent arms race where the tactics of electronic warfare and cyberattacks are already being used every single day. And here's the paradox. A full-scale war in space is fundamentally unwinnable. Using kinetic weapons risks triggering the Kesler Syndrome, a chain reaction of debris that could trap humanity on this planet by making space unusable for everyone. A successful attack on the satellite networks that run our economy and communications would trigger a global collapse unlike anything we've ever seen. The battle for space is already underway, not with explosions, but with signals, code, and strategic positioning. It's a conflict that will define the balance of power on Earth in the 21st century. The challenge for all of us is to find a way to preserve space as a resource for all, instead of letting it become the next great war zone. The next time you look up at the night sky, remember that it's more than just a peaceful expanse of stars. It's a contested domain, critical to our way of life, and the front line in a new invisible world war. What do you think is the best way to stop a full-blown conflict in space? Let us know in the comments below.